Okay, so continuing on, I want to look at development, wherein we will create our own custom components within Cycle. So again, I'd just like to reiterate over what's inside a component. In Cycle 1.0, we will have Knockout, we'll have Require.js and Backbone, and this together will provide us with the view model, model view model. Now, components themselves, I'm going to actually go to Visual Studio for this, so I'm just going to minimize. Now, as we see here, we have our application that we have created so far. Now I have slightly modified it. I put this list control within a column panel within 8, and I set the grid columns to 8 so that it limits the width of our grid, our list control, sorry. So now, how do we create components? If we go into our Solution Explorer and we go into the folder within our file directory we have created for our application, and here I just call it TrendSpot, and I've got another folder called Renderings. We're going to add a new item, so this is in our Solution Explorer. So we're going to add a Speak component. As I said, the newer version does have some changes within it, which I'll try and cover a bit later, but for now we're just going to use it with the 1.1 components. So this is going to be called Simple Component, and this is our new component. Now what this does is this will create a Cycle item as well as 3 files. The item will reference a CS/HTML file, which in turn will reference a JavaScript file. It will also create a test JavaScript file, which you can use to test the component out. But you don't need this if you do not want it. So we'll just wait for that to load. Okay, so now CycleRox has created these 3 files, and it has taken me to the page settings folder in Cycle Solution Explorer, and so it's allowing me to select where I want to create the actual item, which I've got a folder here called Renderings. So we'll select that area, and now we have our component item. If we open this up, just double click on it and get the properties, we'll see it references a Razor file, a CS/HTML. And so this is our view, and this view references our JavaScript file, which sits here, and this provides the logic. So in the JavaScript file we have a model for, and this is only actually applicable for Speak 1.0. In the newer version they've combined this into one method, but for this version we have a model, and that model contains the data, and then we have the view, and this is able to reference whatever is in our CS/HTML directly. I'll go into that in more detail. But for now, what we're going to do is just create our simple component. So, just so we can have a look at something, I'm going to have this component just equal a simple field. So this little div attribute here will be where we're going to output our HTML or our view of the component. So here we're going to just have a span tag and say my component, and we're just going to actually add it to our application. So our task, we'll go to design layout, which I open here, and we're just going to add our component, which is simple component. Okay, now you'll notice that there's no ID here when it was created. We have a name but no ID. This is because we haven't actually referenced a template, so we don't actually have the ID field available. So when we create a component, this component item here, it won't have a templates parameter out of the box, or by when it's created, I should say. So what we have to do is create that template itself. So we can right click on it and go create Speak parameters template, or we can simply add a new item, and it's the standard template, and then we can call it parameters template. Both of them do exactly the same, except for this button here, the create Speak template, will automatically set an template to inherit, which is control base. The control base has our ID field, which means with that saved and it referencing our new item, our new template, sorry, if we re-add this simple component to the page, we'll now have an ID field. And if we remove it altogether and add it, it can now create the ID. So I'll save that and I'll just go into our browser and we'll refresh this. So now we've associated it and we have my new component. Pretty simple. Now what we want to do is create some fields for this component, some properties. Now the way that we do this is that we go into our JavaScript file and we're going to set a property, and this property is just a standard JavaScript property, so we go this.set and we're going to call it my field. So this is the property name, whoops, and the value is going to equal my property value. This is a standard JavaScript property of an object. So now in our CSHTML we can reference this by calling rendering.getString, because we are defining this property as a string. So rendering.getString my field, and that's going to get what we want, and then we're going to output it using this tag. So I'll just call it my field. So this rendering, which calls a simple component JavaScript file which defines this property my field, will get the my field value and allow us to access it using this my field handler. So if I change this span, I'll get rid of our previous text and I'll change it to have a binding. So I'm going to data bind the text value to equal my field. What we should have is this value here, my property value, displayed there. So I'll just go back into our page and refresh it, and we have my property value. Okay. Now we can do this for a number of fields, so I can go rendering.getString and my field 2, my field 2, and likewise we can bind this to an element. And in this case I'm just going to bind it to a div text my field 2. That up. So now if we're going to our JavaScript file, we can define this property to, and we can set it to null. This wouldn't display anything, so we'll refresh it. We wouldn't get anything anyway because we haven't added it, so we have, sorry. If we changes to my second value, refresh it, we get that second value there. Now how do we actually bind this to equal the value of something, say like the text box? This is actually fairly simple. All we have to do is go back to our template. So this is our template item here, and we create additional fields. So I'll call this a data field section. This is a standard cycler template. We're going to call this the my field property, and this will be for my field 2. So this should match whatever's defined in this property here, or whatever you want to pull from here. And we'll save that. We'll just set it into shared. Now if we go back to our layout, so we've just defined two properties in the template which we inherit in this item. We just re-add this component, so simple component there, and we'll now have our data section with our two fields. So we can call this my property field value, for an original. A second. Okay. So we have that there. So that's going to be unloaded. We don't actually need to set anything, so I might change this to null. So this isn't going to be set statically, and so we have that defined in our template. So if we refresh this, must have missed something. And I realise what I've done. I'll explain it in just a bit, but what we actually want to do is just get rid of these and bind this to be the value of our text box. And so go down to text box 1.text, and so we'll save that and refresh it. We now have sample text. So that's binding our data to our new component. Now the reason it wasn't working is because when I set this value in here, it was being overwritten by an empty text field or a null text field. But when I update this, the event updates the new value, and it overwrites that empty value, so just look out for that. Okay, so that's how we can do event binding. So if I put something in here, I'll refresh it, see that second one has that value, and the first one is bound by our text box. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just go back to PowerPoint. So I'll just resume it and to carry on. I think I went a bit far. Data binding. Okay, so the component breakdown, component item. We have a parameter which we can define fields for, and we can access these fields within our CS and JavaScript. So we can set the fields through our JavaScript itself, or we can do data binding from other components to update our fields and display them through the view. Now what I didn't show you, and there's another way to do it in 1.0, is to update it through the view. I didn't show you this because in 1.1 this has been removed, or it has been combined into a single view model function, so it's less important, and that was well, this is the logic, so we update it that way, and that was updating it from the view. So our view function can also directly update our actual input, the span tag in our HTML attributes, but in 1.1 we don't need to do this at all, so I'll just skip that. And we can update it through external components, so the logic is as seen there. Now we can also access site called content by doing API jQuery AJAX calls with this $.get. So in here I have a controller called getUpdateFields, and the controller is a simple MVC controller with a standard action which returns an action result, and is of a HTTP GET method, and it is a standard cycle really. It passes through the field, which will be the field I want to pull the value from. It looks through the database for a specific item in this case, but obviously you could pass through an item ID as well, and it gets the value of that field and then returns it in there. I'll just quickly show you an example in Visual Studio. So I think we have this controller here, which is get item name controller, and so So if I wanted to reference this, I could just go into my simple component and I'll create a new method, and it'll be called get item name function, and so I'm going to reference this method, and let's just look at this controller itself. Passes through an ID for an item, so obviously I'm going to have to have an item ID, so I'll go into my master database, just quickly get the home ID. Okay, so ID equals, okay, so we have our ID, and then we're going to call the method, so it's going to be .get, which is a standard jQuery Ajax, and then we do API.cycle, and then our controller name, which is get item name, and we don't obviously use controller, so get item name, and then our actual method, which is get name, and we pass through that GUID as well, so we get name there, and then we pass through this GUID parameter, so GUID, and we're going to pass the ID through, capitalize that. Okay, so we call the controller here, call the method name, we pass through this parameter, which is GUID, and we're passing through this ID as a parameter, so there should be a colon, and then we need to have an unsuccess, so the call function, and we're going to pass back the data, and we're going to set myfield to this one here as whatever we get, so the data itself, this dot set myfield to data. Okay, so so let's look at the logic. This function get item name, and this is why we call self. So we refer, because of JavaScript scoping, we create a variable called self, and so that will refer to this object. So we can then escape this method here, this scope initial here, where we create a function, and we can reference this field. So we create this self, we get an ID value, which I've set to be the home item. We use this jQuery get call to reference this get item. I should put get. Okay, so we reference this get item name, and we pass through the ID of this function. Now I'll probably have to actually just build this. Okay, so now in the second field we're actually going to set it to be get item name. So we're going to set the value of this to be whatever, well, we don't actually have to do that, we just have to reference it. So I can set that to be empty, and we can reference it there, and we specify this field name and update it there anyway. So let's go back to my page, let's refresh this and wait for it to load, and it should get the name of the home item, which was home, and update that field. and we'll just have to wait for it to reload because I did compile. It takes a bit of time. I'll close this threads. So while we're doing that, I'll just continue on with my presentation, which is just that logic. So exactly the same. We have this function here, which we can set properties for, which we refer to a controller, which references our cycle database and then returns the values like so. Okay, so that's the end of the development. And so as we can see now, we have home. So it's pulling that item name and displaying it in my field too. And our first field is still data binding.